This 6-year-old took the life of his classmate because she rejected him. 6-year-old Dedrick Owens lived in Mount Morris Township, Michigan, which was about an hour away from the state's capital. He wasn't born into the best family as his father was in jail, but on the other hand, his mother was there and tried to support him and his brother as much as she could. She worked 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough and they got evicted. Dedrick ended up living in a crack house with his uncle, and this soon would affect his behavior. At 6 years old, his behavior was really bad. He would swear, flip people off, pinch, and hit other kids. His behavior got so bad that he had even stabbed a girl with a pencil in his school. On February 29th of 2000, Dedrick got into a fight with another male classmate. It escalated so quickly that he had even threatened to shoot the boy. No one knew that Dedrick had found a gun at his uncle's house and brought it with him to school along with a knife. He decided not to use it yet because he had plans on using it on 6-year-old Kayla Rowland. Just the day before, Dedrick tried to kiss Kayla, but she pushed him away and rejected him, which made him really mad and he wanted revenge. Once it was time to change classes, Dedrick walked up to Kayla and said, "I don't like you," and shot her once in the arm. The bullet entered her right arm and hit a vital artery, which caused her to suffer from a cardiac arrest, and she was pronounced dead. Dedrick had threw the gun in the trash before running to a nearby bathroom, but eventually was cornered by teachers and law enforcement. Once he was in police custody, he explained what he had done and showed no remorse. Because of Dedrick's age, he was not charged with murder, but was instead expelled for 90 days and was placed into foster care. His uncle ended up being arrested and sentenced up to 15 years for involuntary manslaughter.
This is why people just mind their own business. He went to Walmart for some Tylenol and then walked out in handcuffs for a crime that he didn't even commit. His name is Mr. Patel. He lives in Georgia, and one afternoon he went to go to Walmart to pick up some pain meds. Totally normal, right? But while walking the aisles, he notices a woman in a wheelchair and she is holding a small child on her lap. She bumped into a display, and then the kid starts slipping off, almost falling, and Mr. Patel, he does what any decent person would do. He steps in, catches the child, helps the woman, and that's it. No drama, no yelling. He walks away and pays for his Tylenol and then just leaves the store. That should have been the end of it, but then 3 days later, he was arrested, charged with assault, attempted kidnapping, and burglary. For what? For helping a mom hold her baby? Make it make sense. It turns out the woman filed a freaking report saying that he tried to take the child. She claimed, and I quote, "He pulled him, I pulled him back. We were basically tug of war." But Walmart's footage security tells a whole different story. In the video, you can see Mr. Patel calmly assisting. No pulling, no grabbing. He just helps, he pays, and then he leaves. That's it. But the police did not care. They arrested him anyways. They threw him in jail and then plastered his mugshot everywhere. He had to hire an attorney and fight for months just to clear his name, and it's not even clear yet. All that for being a decent human being in a Walmart aisle, and the worst part is that he is still locked up, and he's been locked up for over a month. No apology, no statement from the cops, not even from Walmart, and I'm sitting here are you joking? If you punish people for doing the right thing, then do not be surprised when next time nobody helps at all. This is why people just mind their own business.
If you thought being trapped in a lift was terrifying, imagine it's pitch black and it slowly starts filling with water. New fear unlocked. This must have been an absolute living nightmare. It was January 2020 in Tel Aviv when a couple in their 20s entered an underground lift in their apartment block. The pair were Dean Yaakov Shoshani and Stav Harari. They had no idea they were entering effectively their own underground coffin. There had been floods all over the city. Essentially, they just had way more rainfall than they were prepared for. They'd had to close roads, power was going out all over the city. It was absolute chaos. And very soon after entering the lift, the couple realised they'd made a terrible mistake. Power to the lift suddenly failed and they realised they were stuck. The lift was in the building's underground parking garage and they couldn't get the lift to go up. Then they realised they couldn't even get the doors to open to let them out. This would be scary enough. I can't even imagine that feeling of oh my god, we're trapped in a lift. But then water started pouring in. People nearby suddenly heard shouting coming from this lift and they raced over to try and desperately get them out, but they couldn't. People were frantically calling emergency services. They were screaming. They were desperately trying to get help. This was a race against the clock. They knew if that lift filled up and up and up, eventually they weren't going to survive. But the phone lines were so busy because everybody in the city was trying to get hold of emergency services. There were so many flood-related emergencies that they just couldn't cope with it. Another guy who lived in the building who saw all of this unfold was desperately ringing and ringing and ringing, and he kept getting hung up on. It was so traumatizing, bless him. He was desperately trying to help, but he knew every single time that they hung up that phone, it was getting less and less likely that this couple would get out. He was frantically trying his best to prise the door open, but obviously he just couldn't. The couple were frantically screaming until eventually The screams stopped. Rescuers took over half an hour to eventually arrive, and when they did, crews had to use scuba gear to go under the water to find the couple. They were rushed to hospital, but tragically there was absolutely nothing that could be done to save them. Next day, the fire and rescue services issued a public warning: do not use lifts during heavy rainfall.
This trans man went missing, and when they found him, his body was dumped in a field wrapped in plastic. His name was Sam. He was 24 years old, bright, soft-spoken, and finally living as his true self. He grew up in Minnesota, a place that was not always kind to people like him, but he never let that stop him. He transitioned and found a new sense of confidence and even connected with somebody special online. A girl named Precious. She was 38 with kids, but Sam did not mind. He was totally into her. They clicked instantly, so when she invited him to go to New York, he packed his bag and went. And at first, everything seemed picture perfect. They took cute selfies together. They made TikToks together. Sam probably thought that he'd finally found somebody who completely accepted him. But then he found out that Precious was not who she said she was. She was a predator. And with the help with 6 other people, they kidnapped him and held him hostage in a motel for 2 months. They starved him, beat him, shoved objects inside of him, poured bleach on him, forced him to crawl and obey them like a dog. I mean, the list is disgusting. And when they were done, they wrapped his body in plastic bags. And then they dumped him on the side of the road where they thought that nobody would care to find him. Meanwhile, Sam's family grew extremely worried. They hadn't heard from him in weeks, which was not like him at all. They reported him missing, and it wasn't until another 5 weeks later that they finally found his body. All 7 of them, including Precious, were arrested. And let me be crystal clear, Sam was not threatening anyone. He was not dangerous at all. He just wanted to be loved. He just wanted to be accepted for who he really was, and instead they tortured him like he wasn't even human. I hope every single one of those evil monsters rot in prison and never see the light of day again, because Sam did not deserve any of this horror.
There's a really sad and scary story unfolding in Arizona right now. So on the morning of May 22nd, 46-year-old Hope Tucker and her adult son were driving on Interstate 10 in Buckeye when their car broke down. It's important to note that Hope's son is autistic and mostly nonverbal. They broke down between Verrado Way and Watson Road. Police believe that Hope, her son, and their dog got out and started walking on foot to either find shade or help, but they ended up disappearing. Their car was found that day and towed away by the Department of Public Safety. 2 days later, her son was found extremely dehydrated at a gas station on Watson Road, just a few miles away from where their car broke down. He was then hospitalized for an entire month before being reunited with his grandpa. But during his month-long hospital stay, he never once mentioned that his mom was missing or still out there somewhere in the desert. It wasn't until he was with his grandpa on June 22nd, exactly 1 month later, that he told his grandpa what happened, and his grandpa then called the police. Because her son is mostly nonverbal, police brought in a specialized forensic interviewer to get as much information from him as they could to help find his mom. He ended up telling police that his mom passed away the same day that their car broke down. He said that after they were walking for a while, Hope laid down to rest, closed her eyes, and just stopped breathing. So Buckeye police started looking for her that day. They brought in tracking dogs, drones, and ATVs to search for her, but at this point, things weren't looking good because they were already a month behind. But after a 2-week search, authorities found the remains of Hope and her dog just this past Monday. They found her just outside of the Sienna Hills community near Verrado Way and Thomas Road. Where she was found was less than 2 miles from Interstate 10. At this point, police say they don't suspect foul play as her body showed no obvious signs of trauma, and her cause of death has yet to be determined. The area where they broke down is in the middle of the desert, really undeveloped, and has some pretty steep hills. It was also close to 100 degrees the day she went missing. The story is so heartbreaking, and I truly can't imagine what they both went through out there all alone.
He ate his classmate because he was obsessed with her and was never punished. Issei Sagawa was born on April 26 of 1949 in Kobe, Japan. He was born into a pretty privileged life, his family had money, and he had a good childhood. Issei was born prematurely, so he was very small, and because of his small size, his parents would shelter him. Growing up, Issei started to go by the nickname Pang, and by the 1st grade, he had his first cannibalistic desire. He saw a male classmate's thigh and thought about eating it. Apparently, Pang and his brother would play a cannibal game with his uncle, and this is what started his desires. As Pang got older, talking to women wasn't his thing. He was insecure, awkward, and would just keep to himself, but he would fantasize about these women. Once Pang was in his 20s, he was living in Tokyo, and he thought it would be a good idea to follow a tall German girl home. He thought this was a great idea because she was walking alone, she was tall, beautiful, and blonde, but he didn't want to ask her out. He wanted to eat her. So he broke into her apartment when she was sleeping, wearing a Frankenstein mask, and had nothing with him but an umbrella. Pang's plan was to slice off a piece of her butt and sneak away with it. The second he made his move, she woke up, screamed, and pushed him to the ground. Somehow this woman managed to hold him there until police arrived. Peng was arrested and charged with attempted SA, but instead of serving time, his parents paid off the victim and he was free. Peng's parents swept this under the rug and didn't seem too concerned about this. In 1977, when Peng was 27 years old, he packed his bags and moved to France to go to one of the universities. It would be his first time living away from his parents and he felt free. Since Peng wasn't under supervision of his parents, he would pick up sex workers every single night and had the intention of eating them. But thankfully for these women, he would never follow through because he would freeze every single time. On June 11th of 1981, Peng decided that tonight was a night and he chose his victim, Renee Hartevelt. Renee was a 25-year-old student from Holland and Peng was obsessed with her. She was beautiful, brilliant, and kind. Unfortunately, Renee didn't see the danger in Peng. She just saw that he was a quiet classmate who needed a friend. Peng had invited Renee over for dinner so that she could translate some poetry for him. Peng claimed that he loved her and he thought the best way to be close to her was to consume her. When she got there, Renee started reading the poetry out loud and her back was facing him. Peng picked up a rifle, tried to pull the trigger, but it misfired. At this point, Renee had no idea what was going on. She didn't know if this was from a sound outside or if something went off, and Peng pulled the trigger again, shot her in the neck, killing her almost instantly. This was something that Peng had fantasized for years, and once that happened, he ended up fainting. Once he woke up, he realized that Renee was dead, so his fantasy took over and the obsession quickly kicked in. Peng had sex with Renee's dead corpse and kissed her and told her that he loved her. Next, he wanted to eat her, but he couldn't because his teeth weren't sharp enough. Peng got a butcher knife and started to cut her into smaller pieces so that it would be easier for him to eat. He ate most of her breast and face and saved the other parts in the refrigerator. Peng had spent a total of 48 hours in his apartment with Renee's body. He then put the rest of her body into 2 suitcases, got a taxi, and told them to drop him off at a nearby lake. Peng tried to dump her body in a lake, but he was seen and arrested by French police. Once he was taken into custody, he immediately admitted to everything. Peng stayed in France while he was awaiting trial, but since he came from a wealthy family, his father swooped in and got him out of jail. The judge ruled that Peng was legally insane, so they sent him to a mental institution instead of jail. In 1984, just 3 years after eating Renee, Peng was sent back to Tokyo, and he was evaluated by psychiatrists there, and they said, "He's fine, he's sane." Peng unalived and ate a woman, and he received no jail time, no probation. He was free. Peng was such a hit in Japan that he started writing books, coming out in interviews, and even movies. He even posed for magazine covers, and people were treating him like an icon. Peng profited off his crime, and he would make money talking about how Renee tasted. In 2022, Peng was 73 years old and he died from pneumonia. He never spent a day in prison, he never apologized, and never showed real remorse.
He didn't want the world to know that he was dating a transgender woman, and so instead of breaking up with her, he murdered her. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Casaria Abramidze. Casaria was born in Tbilisi, Georgia in August 1987. She would grow up to be one of the most popular and well-known trans women in the entire country. She was one of, if not the first, open, out and proud, unapologetically trans figure from Georgia. She was incredibly popular and had a very successful career in the entertainment industry. She was an actress, model, presenter. She won Miss Trans Star International in 2018 and she was a successful influencer. At her peak, she had over 500,000 followers on her Instagram. Casaria did not take her platform for granted, and she used it to speak out on what she believed in. She was very passionate about LGBTQIA+ and women's rights. 37-year-old Casaria and 26-year-old Bika Gianni had been in an on and off relationship for quite some time, and to say that their relationship was toxic and abusive would be an absolute understatement. Casaria had reported Bika to the police for domestic violence several times. She was a victim of not only physical but mental abuse. Her neighbours within her apartment building would often hear the couple getting into very fiery arguments. And at one point within their relationship, it got so heated and Casaria became so scared that she actually fled the country to get away from Bika. On the 18th of September 2024, CCTV cameras would capture Beaker walking into Kasaria's apartment building and then leaving around about 10 minutes later. During the time that he was in the apartment, neighbours would recall hearing an altercation, and so after he left, they went to check on Kasaria, who they would find lay in a pool of her own blood covered in stab wounds. It would later be discovered that she had been stabbed at least 28 times. Police officers would later describe this murder saying, quote, "This was a premeditated murder committed with particular cruelty." Police were quickly called, and the very next day they arrested Baker Gianni while he was at the airport trying to leave the country. He is never actually given a motive as to why he murdered Kasaria. However, just the day before the murder, two significant things happened. The country of Georgia introduced a horrible anti-LGBTQIA+ law, and Kasaria had posted a photo of herself and Baker to her Instagram. It was said to have enraged Baker, who wanted to keep their relationship secret. He did not want anyone to know that he and Kasaria were dating, and so when she posted this photo, he became enraged, especially after everything with the law coming in, and so he murdered her in retaliation. Baker Gianni would admit to the murder of Kasaria Abramitsi. However, he would deny the aggravating factor that the murder was down to her gender identity. He would go on to be sentenced to life imprisonment.
They called this man the Toy Box Killer, and he might be one of the most terrifying men I ever had the misfortune of reading about. And now you're gonna know all about him too. David Parker Ray had been having dark fantasies of hurting women and just doing the most terrible things to them as young as when he was only 9 years old. He is a textbook sadist, which makes him one of the most terrifying people out there, because when he hurt women, he did it because he enjoyed it. Like, deeply enjoyed it. David Parker Ray is known as the Toy Box Killer because he had this trailer in his backyard that he called the Toy Box, that he filled with everything and anything that could cause the most unspeakable pain to his victims. And he spent like over $100,000 on the items inside of his toy box, so there were a lot of things in there. He would kidnap young women to keep in his toy box, and then once they were in his toy box, he would play them a tape recording where he would explain in graphic detail everything that he planned to do to them. Is that not the most terrifying thing you've ever heard? And this tape recording is online if you want to go hear it, but do it at your own risk because it is deeply disturbing. In his toy box, he also had a chair, like a chair that you would find at the Lady Doctor. And then he would chain his victims to the chair, he would essay them, and then hurt them in the most unspeakable ways possible. David Parker Ray would also film everything he did to these women, and then he would sell the videos to I don't know who, but scary people, and he would sell them for a lot of money. David Parker Ray did not act alone. He actually had a lot of accomplices, including his own daughter. David's daughter, Jessie, was always very close to her father, almost too close. Like, a lot of people actually think that her father fathered her child, and Jessie was trained from a very young age to be like her father's assistant, and she would help lure women to be her father's victims, including her own friends. And once David decided that he was done with the women that he had in captivity, he would do one of three things to them. He would either kill them, or he would sell them across the Mexico border into human trafficking, or he would even let them go. He would let them go on a remote country back road, and they would never, come forward or turn him in the police because he kept them so heavily sedated on a bunch of substances that they would not even remember a single thing. Some of his victims that he did let go ended up coming forward years later after the memories came back years later. So chances are that there's probably a lot of women out there that don't even remember that they were victims of this guy. David Parker Ray was really living a double life. He lived in this really, really small town where everyone knew each other. Everyone thought that he was a normal, good guy, a good father, but they had no idea how evil their neighbor really was. David has also been described as kind of a ladies' man, if you can even believe that, because he always had some pretty young girlfriend. He even had this girlfriend, Cindy, who was also helping him with his toy box. I'm not sure how this man was able to convince so many people to help him out, because even when his daughter Jessie got a boyfriend, he was able to convince the boyfriend to also help with the toy box and help kidnap and kill these victims. So it was just these 4 people committing the most evil crimes imaginable. And all of this only ever came to light in March of 1999 when David and his girlfriend kidnapped a 22-year-old girl named Cynthia. They had her in captivity for 3 entire days, you know, doing the worst things possible to her, when David's girlfriend accidentally left the keys to her restraints in her reach while David was at work. She grabbed the house phone and tried to call 911, but before she could say anything to the person on the other phone, David's girlfriend came back in, found her, caught her, and then the two started fighting. Luckily, she was able to escape, and she runs to the first house that she can find. She's banging on the door, she's screaming that she's been held captive, and Cynthia's not wearing anything. She's wearing nothing but a dog collar and a bunch of chains. The neighbor calls 911, but because Cynthia has been on all these substances, she can't really remember much. But luckily, she did make that 911 call when she first escaped. So they were able to track where that 911 call was made from and track it right back to David Parker Ray's house. And these small town police officers had no idea what they were walking into when they stepped into David's toy box. They find hundreds of videos of what David did to his victims, because remember, he filmed it all, but David tried to say, hey, everything in the videos is consensual, it's just acting. But his 3 accomplices, his girlfriend, his daughter, and his daughter's boyfriend, they all turn on him and they confess everything. They tell the police everything in graphic detail. They told the police that David would kill at least 1 girl every single year for 40 years, you guys. And that David had this boat and he would take it to this nearby lake that had these ginormous catfish, you guys. And these catfish would eat anything. And that's how David would dispose of his victims. But unfortunately, because of this, they were not able to find a single one of David's victims' bodies. Even though it's believed that David killed at least 60 women, but probably more, and they had videotapes of him doing it, they were not able to charge him with a single one. For the crimes that they were able to find concrete evidence of, they were able to sentence David Parker Ray to 224 years in prison. But get this, after spending 1 day in prison, David Parker Ray had a heart attack and died. So he never even had to serve a prison sentence for all these terrible crimes that he committed. His 3 accomplices, his girlfriend Cindy, his daughter Jessie, and her boyfriend Roy, all spent only a couple years in prison before being released, so they're all out free somewhere in the world right now today. This is one of those terrible cases where you feel like there was no justice that was really gotten and there's no closure because of it, and it's just despicable. This man is so scary, and the fact that there's people like that out there gives me the chills. Please let me know all your guys' thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much. At one point, this girl was the youngest woman on death row. This is a case of one of the messiest love triangles I've ever heard of, and it feels like something out of a TV show. This is Amelia Carr from Florida. She had a really rough childhood. Her father and her grandfather both began to essay her when she was only 4 years old. And when the authorities were made aware of this, her father, not her grandfather, only her father, was given a court-ordered program to fix him, no jail time, and then was right back in the home where the abuse continued. It only ever ended when Amelia was 15 years old, so over 10 years of suffering through this abuse, when she told someone at the school what was happening at home. So her father was arrested and placed in jail, and behind bars, her father tried to hire a hitman to kill his own daughter because she turned him in. But that hitman was actually a undercover police officer. And for all of this, the over 10 years of essaying his own daughter and then trying to hire a hitman against her, he was only given 4 years in prison. Amelia had a lot of trauma and complex emotions after this. There was shame, there was guilt. She was always this really brilliant child. She had an extremely high IQ. She was an honor roll student, but she dropped out of high school. She ran away from home. She got pregnant with her first child when she was only 17 years old. And then by the time she was 21 years old, she was a single mother of 3 children. And now this is where that messy love triangle I told you about comes into play. So Amelia was in an on-again, off-again relationship with her youngest child's father, a guy named Jamie, and Jamie had a new best friend, a guy who had just moved to Florida named Josh. Josh had just moved to Florida with his long-term girlfriend, his high school sweetheart named Heather. Josh and Heather had a child together. The relationship was really good. They were like this little family until Josh got addicted to a substance called crystal. You know, crystal. His personality completely changed. So they moved to Florida for a fresh new start, but shortly after they moved to Florida, Heather got pregnant again. Well, Josh was not happy about this, so he actually started cheating on his pregnant girlfriend with his best friend Jamie's girlfriend, Amelia. You see how this starts to get messy? It gets worse. Well, Heather found out that Josh was cheating on her with Amelia, and so began this terrible cycle where Josh and Heather would break up, so he would go be with Amelia, and then he would leave Amelia to go back to Heather, and then Heather and Josh would break up again, so he would go date Amelia, he would leave her to be with Heather, and so on and so forth, and this would continue for over 2 years. Allegedly, at one point, they were even in a throuple. Well, at some point, Heather has enough of this headache, so she dumps Josh. She starts dating a new guy. He's a good guy. She's in like a healthy, stable relationship for once, but Josh cannot let her go. Josh begins stalking Heather. He's threatening her and her new boyfriend, but the entire time that Josh is harassing his ex-girlfriend Heather, he's dating Amelia. He even gets Amelia pregnant and proposes to her. So they're fiancés, but he's still stalking and harassing his ex-girlfriend Heather. And because toxic relationships can be so difficult to break out of, Heather decides that she wants Josh back. So Josh leaves Amelia, the woman that he's just proposed to, who was pregnant with his child, to get back together with Heather. And within a few days, he proposes to Heather with the same ring that he used to propose to Amelia. And within 1 month, Josh and Heather were married. But it was not happily ever after for Josh and Heather now. Oh, no, because only 10 days into their marriage, Josh and Heather got into a fight, and Josh threatened to kill Heather, which landed him in jail. And within a few days of Josh going to jail, Heather had a new boyfriend, and I bet you'll never guess who it is. It was Jamie. You remember Jamie? It was Josh's best friend and Amelia's baby daddy. And with Josh behind bars, Amelia starts visiting him and they rekindle their relationship. And Amelia is so mad at Heather for 1, sending Josh to prison, and 2, because Heather was dating her ex-boyfriend. I wonder if Amelia even saw the irony in that. So not only is Amelia threatening Heather to drop the charges against Josh, but she also starts going around town offering anyone $500 to kill Heather. Like father, like daughter, right? Because as you remember, Amelia's father tried to hire somebody to kill her. Well, Amelia scared Heather, so much in fact that Heather dropped the charges against Josh, and Josh was released from jail. And within 9 days of Josh being released from jail, Heather Strong went missing. Well, the police, they question Amelia and they question Josh, and they question them separately, and Josh actually cracks. He tells them that he lured Heather to meet him, but Amelia was secretly there. The two of them attacked Heather. They tied her to a chair where they forced her to sign over custody of their children to him. And then with duct tape over Heather's mouth, Amelia calmly just walks over to her and holds her nose so she couldn't breathe. That's so sinister. And she did it so calmly, and that's just such a twisted way to end somebody's life. And Amelia killed Heather while she's still pregnant with Josh's child, because this is how fast all of this happened. Amelia wasn't as easy to crack as Josh, because as you remember, Amelia has an extremely high IQ. She's a lot smarter than Josh. She does not fall for the interrogation tactics that they do. So they actually only got a confession out of Amelia because they secretly recorded a conversation that she was having with one of her friends. While awaiting her trial, Amelia gave birth to her and Josh's child, which was put up for adoption, and then her 3 other children and Heather and Josh's 2 children were put into the foster system. And it actually is so sad and breaks my heart how many children were in the middle of this terrible mess. Amelia and Josh had 2 separate trials, and Amelia was found guilty and sentenced to death row, and Josh was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for essentially the same crime, which has been very controversial, but you guys are going to have to let me know what you think about that. To this day, Amelia continues to claim that she is actually 100% innocent and this was all Josh. And in 2017, her sentence was actually switched to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This case was absolutely crazy, and I have a lot I want to say at the end here. For one, I hope I don't see any comments of people victim blaming Heather because she continued to stay with Josh and go back to him. As someone that was in a toxic relationship for a really, really long time, I know how hard it is to finally get out of it. And I'm sure a lot of people watching it can sympathize and empathize with Heather in this situation. If you or someone you know are in a toxic relationship and you are scared, just know that you are not alone and there are a lot of resources out there that can help you. Heather Strong is not responsible for what happened to her. It is not her fault. There's only 2 people that are to blame to what happened to Heather, and they are exactly where they need to be. I know this was a really complicated case to follow, but you guys are always telling me that I'm really good at being able to make cases make sense for you guys to follow. So I hope you felt that way in this case, because Heather Strong's story was something I really wanted to talk about today, and also about like domestic violence and toxic relationships. If you guys listened to Heather Strong's story, thank you guys so much for staying here, because I know it was a long video. Let me know all your guys' thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, please tell me what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
I believe that this is the exact moment where Chris Watts realises that he has been caught out for the murder of his entire family. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the Watts family murders. Chris Watts and Shanann Ruzek met over Facebook after Chris sent Shanann a friend request. The two began to chat, they went on a couple of dates, and soon Shanann would fall head over heels in love with Chris. The couple would go on to get married in 2015. They had their first daughter Bella in 2013, followed by Cece, who came in 2015. From the outside, it looked like the Wattses lived the picture-perfect all-American life. They had the big house, they drove the fancy cars, they went on many holidays. Shanann had a very big, engaging audience on social media, and Chris worked a good job. They appear to be a beautiful, happy, loving, ordinary family. However, on the inside, things were slightly different. The couple were in debt, they had begun bickering more, and the cracks in their relationship only worsened when Chris met Nicole Kessinger. The two met while they were at work, and they began having an affair. It was at around this time that Shanann revealed to Chris that she was pregnant with their 3rd baby. Finally, they were going to be having a little boy, something that Chris had dreamed about, and he decided that the baby was going to be named Nico. Despite initially seeming happy and excited following the news of this pregnancy, things just seemed different. Shanann confided in her friends how Chris had started to change. He was becoming reserved, and he started sleeping in the basement of the house, very rarely with the two getting intimate. And he had even started to isolate or distance himself away from his daughters, which was incredibly strange because Chris was considered to be a perfect father. Shanann also suspected that Chris was seeing another woman, and whenever she tried to bring this up to him and find out if there was something wrong between the two so that they could fix it, he would always fob her off. He just wasn't interested. Which was so strange because before all of this, Chris was a man who idolised the ground that Shanann walked on. So she really noticed this switch. On the 27th of June 2018, Shanann, alone, took Bella and Cece for a 6-week holiday over to North Carolina so that they could visit their families. For the first 5 weeks that they were away, Chris spent almost all of his time with Nicole, taking her out on dates, taking her for meals, having lots of fun together, staying over at her house and getting intimate with her. Chris had become addicted and obsessed with Nicole, and it got to a point where he even started ignoring FaceTimes and text messages from Shanann, even when Shanann was ringing him, so that Bella and Cece could speak to their dad. It was while they were away and Chris sort of had this space away from his family that he decided he actually quite enjoyed this life with Nicole, who was a cool girl. They were happy-go-lucky and carefree and had absolutely no responsibilities, and Chris had taken a fondness to this lifestyle. And to him, in order to keep it, he had to get his family out of the picture. He would go on to fly out to North Carolina to join Shanann and the girls for the last week of their holiday. And he admitted in a book that he co-wrote that while he was here, he actually drugged Shanann, hoping that this drug would make her lose baby Nico, because in his sick head, Shanann not being pregnant and not having another child with him would make their separation easier. When they all returned back home to Colorado, Shanann really put all of her cards on the table and told Chris how he was making her feel, and that she knew that something was wrong and that she desperately wanted to fix it. She wanted to remain in this marriage, but Chris was not interested. He had made his mind up and he wanted a life with Nicole. After this, Shanann would reluctantly jet off to Arizona, where she was going on a business trip, leaving Bella and Cece behind with their dad. Shanann didn't want to go on this business trip. She wanted to stay at home in Colorado with Chris and talk everything through. But he pushed her to go, promising her that if she just went away for a couple of days, went on this business trip, when she got back, the two of them would book something. They would go somewhere and they would talk through everything and sort everything out. That would save their marriage. And so off she went. Throughout the whole trip to Arizona, friends of Shanann's could say that she wasn't herself. She was very down in the dumps and she wasn't really getting involved in things, when usually she would be the life and soul of the party. Back at home, Chris had changed as well. He wasn't the loving and attentive father that he ordinarily was. In fact, while Shanann was away, he got a babysitter to come in to watch Bella and Cece so that he could take Nicole out for dinner. Bear in mind, he had just spent 5 weeks away from his daughters. Later, he would reveal that I think the day before the murders happened, he took Bella and Cece to a friend's birthday party. And as he watched them having fun, splashing in the pool, smiling, laughing and eating birthday cake, he knew that he was going to kill them, and he did nothing to stop himself or to get any help. In the early hours of the 13th of August, Shanann would be dropped off at home by one of her friends, and this is the final image of Shanann alive. In the book that I mentioned earlier on, Chris claimed that before Shanann came home, he had already attempted to murder Bella and Cece by smothering them. So when Shanann is coming through that front door, he believed that his daughters were dead. He didn't realise that they weren't in fact dead until they walked in on him, witnessing him in the middle of murdering Shanann, that he realised that they were alive. He would recall feeling angry that Bella and Cece, his daughters, weren't dead. Chris would go on to load up his truck with all of the girls. He put Shanann's body on the floor of the back seat and then Bella and Cece in their car seats with their little legs dangling over the dead body of their mother. It was while doing this that one of his neighbours captured him on CCTV footage, which ultimately led him to watching this with the police, leading to this reaction. The moment where I think that Chris realised that he had been caught out. After loading up the truck, he proceeded to drive to an oil-based thing that he knew because of his work. Once here, he buried Shanann in a shallow grave and took turns smothering each of his daughters. Bella fought for her life against her father, but to no avail. Chris would then proceed to force both of his daughters, shoving their bodies through tiny holes to get into these septic tanks. Each of the girls were placed into a different one, him separating all 3 of them even in death. After a friend of Shanann, who was also named Nicole, the same friend that dropped her off the evening before, couldn't get in touch with Shanann and contacted the police, it didn't take long for Chris to be questioned, polygraphed, and then admitting what he had done to his family. He would go on to plead guilty to a total of 9 charges, and in return he received 3 consecutive life sentences plus 84 years to serve, meaning that he will never be released from prison. Many people who know this case speculate that Nicole Kessinger was more involved than we know. She made some very shady Google searches, including doing some research into Amber Fry, Scott Peterson's mistress, and also researching into getting a book deal. She was on the phone to Chris for hours before the murders took place, and yet when questioned, she had absolutely no recollection on what they spoke about, and so much more. Nicole Kessinger has never been considered a suspect in this case, and she has been fully cleared by the police. However, many people are not convinced that she didn't have any idea that the murders were going to happen and that she wasn't involved whatsoever. Comment down below and let me know what you think.
She'd been missing 10 days. They thought she was dead. Then her mum got a panic text from her. It was a cool September in 2006 in Lugoff in South Carolina. 14-year-old Lizzie Shove regularly got the bus to and from school with her younger brother. And she was a responsible girl, she was a really good student, and she followed the rules, so her parents had no reason to think that she would be unsafe. Both children were really well behaved. They always got back home straight away and did their homework. But on the 6th of the month, Lizzie vanished on her way home from school. Her family was frantic. They were handing out flyers all over the neighbourhood, hundreds and hundreds of flyers, and police were out in full force. Worried neighbours gave their own time up to hunt round the woods just to look for any sign of the child. Her dad was driving up and down, scouring the area. but frustratingly, they found nothing. And the police were kind of like, oh, well, she may have run away. But her family were like, no, she is a rule follower. She would never have done this of her own accord. And I don't know whether you guys know this, but actually the police, without like a visible kidnapping, no car number plate, no suspect, the police couldn't actually put out an Amber Alert. And for the next 7 days, Lizzie's poor family, their hearts would stop as soon as they heard any kind of rumour or news about any kind of body that was found. They were immediately bracing themselves for terrible, terrible news. Until Lizzie's mum got a text. It said, hey mum, it's Lizzie. I'm in the ground near Charm Hill. It's near that dirt road where the big trucks park. Go get police though because he has bees. Now she was immediately hysterical. She was like, oh my god, this is the news we've been waiting for. We can find Lizzie. But police were like, well, this could be a hoax. But Lizzie's mum was like, no, look, she has spelt Lizzie with 1 Z. That's the way that Lizzie spelt her own name, and nobody else would know to spell it that way. So police immediately started working with mobile phone tower people, the network people basically, to figure out where this phone was exactly and who it belonged to. It was a guy called Vincent Filior. And he was actually already known to police and he was on the run. They were desperately trying to find him because guess what? He had SA'd a young girl. They raced straight over to his house. I don't know why they didn't go sort of right to the place where Lizzie had suggested in the message, but they went to his house anyway, and they found some disgusting stuff. It was like substances, corn material, bee making equipment, and underground bunkers in his own home. This was terrifying. He was clearly a very messed up man, but there was still no Lizzie. And maybe it's just me, but the next part to me is ridiculously stupid. The police essentially released to the media the news that a text had come through off Lizzie. And Lizzie's mum was furious, like, oh my god, you've just given the game away. If the kidnapper sees that Lizzie has sent a text, he'll know that you're onto him and he might kill her. The mum literally said, you've just killed my daughter. So probably thinking, oh shit, what have we done? Police then carried on scouring the local woods. They were looking everywhere for this little girl. They were shouting her name anywhere that they could. Till on the 10th day, they heard a noise. It was a young girl's voice and she was screaming for help. And the noise was coming from under the ground. It was Lizzie. She'd finally been found. And she'd been through absolute hell. I mean, just look where she had been kept. In the most disgusting conditions, tied up, hard, abused. The most sickening 10 days that anybody could have ever gone through. The reunion with her family was just so unbelievable. They couldn't believe they'd finally got their daughter back. But when they'd heard what she'd been through, they were sick to their stomachs. This man had approached her on her way home from school, and like I said, she was a rule follower, and he pretended he was the police, and he said she was under arrest. He was like, substances have been found at your home. We've already got your brother in custody, so now we need to take you down to the station. And she, bless her, believed him, and she was like, oh my god, I need to go to the station to help my brother. But then he tied a box around her neck, told her it was a bee, and frog marched her into the woods. He then shoved her into the underground bunker and was like, I lied, I've actually kidnapped you. While she was kidnapped, she could hear helicopters up above. It was so infuriating. She knew they must be looking for me, but I'm effectively invisible under the ground. And this was actually even more dangerous than you'd think, because his plan, Vincent's plan, was to booby-trap the bunker, lure police there, and set off bees in order to kill the officers. He wanted revenge for them trying to capture him because he was a paedophile. But Lizzie was incredibly intelligent during this. She was like, maybe if I gain this man's trust and I pretend to like him, then he'll give me a bit more freedom and I'll have more chance of escaping. And it worked. She pretended that she liked him and they formed some kind of relationship. Obviously, Lizzie was faking this. And he started letting her play on his phone. When he was asleep, she used the opportunity to type that message to her mum. And Lizzie's mum was right, actually. Vincent did have a TV and did see that the news had broke that Lizzie had texted for help. But he was pretty panicked and he was only thinking about himself, so he just bolted. He ran. But his freedom didn't last long, and after an intense manhunt, he was finally tracked down not far away. He eventually did plead guilty and he was given 421 years behind bars. Now, he actually didn't serve that amount of time because he died behind bars in 2021 at age just 51. And I couldn't find an exact cause of death for him. I wonder if you guys know, because it does seem incredibly young to die. Not that I'm complaining.
Found no longer alive, his body rolled up in a gym mat. at his own high school. It screams cover up. 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson lived in Valstova, Georgia with his family. He attended Lowndes High School, and his family members speak so sweetly of him. They've described him to be a quiet, sweet boy who was the joy of their house. He was so good at sports. He played 3 different sports, and his dream was to become a professional football player. January 11th of 2013, it was a Friday. That day, Kendrick had after-school activities planned, so he stayed at school afterwards, and his mom was expecting him to come home later that night. But by 10 p.m., Kendrick still wasn't home, which was weird because he would have already been done with whatever sporting event it was that he had. He should have been home, but he wasn't. His mom was so worried sick, she drove to the school to see if she could find him. And after not finding him and not being able to get a hold of him, she called the police and reported her son a missing person. The next day, January 12th, around 10:30 a.m., a group of students were at the high school in the gym playing basketball, and in the corner of the gym, there were a lot of wrestling mats that had been rolled up and put away. One of the guys noticed that it looked like a pair of socks was peeking out of the mat. They looked closer, realized that the socks were on someone's feet, and realized that there was a deceased body rolled up in the mat. The closer they got to the mat, the stronger this awful smell was becoming. It smelled like vomit, amongst other things. They notified the school immediately, and the school immediately went into a lockdown. They announced it over the intercoms, but it's heartbreaking to know that Kendrick's mother was at the school in the building when that announcement was made. That's how she found out that her son had been found. The mat was rolled up in a sitting upright position, and Kendrick's body was found upside down with his arms by his side and obviously his feet sticking out from above. There was one pair of shoes inside the mat with his body. There was a second pair of shoes. One of those shoes was found inside the mat next to his head. The other one was outside. Kendrick's body was taken in for an autopsy, and within 24 hours of him being found, it was ruled that his passing was an accident. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Department claimed that he passed due to positional asphyxia, meaning that he couldn't breathe because he was stuck in that upside down position in an enclosed space for an extended period of time. They said that Kendrick must have been reaching for a shoe that he dropped in the mat, fell into the mat, got stuck, and wasn't able to get out. His body was in terrible condition, by the way. There was a pool of red liquid surrounding him, and his body did not look like one who just accidentally fell, got stuck, and passed away. On top of that, when the mat was rolled up, the width of the hole that was left in the center was 14 inches. Kendrick's shoulder measured 19 inches, so it didn't make sense that he just accidentally fell in there. To a lot of people, it did not add up that this was just an accident, and according to Kendrick's parents specifically, they were not having it. It just didn't make sense, and in the odd chance that it did, say that he somehow, some way accidentally did fall inside the mat, surely he would have been screaming for help. If he fell and was panicking, he would have started yelling for help, and you're telling me that not a single person in a school building of 3,000 students would have heard him calling for help? Kendrick's family members were furious. I would be too. It was their opinion that the police department was way too quickly in ruling out foul play, which it was. It was within 24 hours that it was decided to be an accident. But his parents were convinced that there was something way more sinister at play here. His parents also later learned that the autopsy report did not mention certain injuries to Kendrick's body that the paramedics had put in their initial report. We also learned that there was red liquid found on the wall near the gym mats where Kendrick's body was discovered. However, investigators claimed that it was old and unrelated to Kendrick, and that DNA test showed that it wasn't his. And then they just didn't talk about it further. That was just dismissed. Kendrick's family member got an order to exhume Kendrick's body, and they paid for an independent autopsy. That second autopsy indicated and showed traces of blunt force trauma to his neck, and it suggested that Kendrick's passing was not accidental. And in the most mortifying details, Kendrick's parents found out that every single major organ, so the brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver, etc., had been removed when the funeral got Kendrick's body. It had no organs inside of it, so they stuffed it with newspaper, I guess, and I guess this is a common practice to keep the shape of the body. But the funeral house was saying that that is how they received Kendrick's body, so whoever removed his organs did it before his body was handed over to the funeral home, meaning that that was done when the first initial autopsy was done. The coroner said the organs were too decomposed, so they were removed and disposed of. But regardless, an absolutely mortifying detail for Kendrick's loved ones to learn. And it was also terrible because all of his organs were gone, disposed of, so they couldn't be tested or looked at all when that family got the independent autopsy done. The Johnsons sued the funeral home for mishandling their son's body, but that case was dropped. The Johnsons also filed a wrongful death suit against Lowndes County Board of Education, its superintendent, and the principal of the high school. That suit alleged that Kendrick was, quote, violently severely injured, suffered great physical pain and mental anguish, and subjected to insult and loss of life, end quote. It was the family's belief that there was foul play involved, that this was not an accident, and that someone was responsible for doing this. The lawsuit also claimed that another student, Brian Bell, had a history of picking on and bullying Kendrick at school, and that bullying kept happening even after Kendrick's mom brought it to the school's attention. So this other student, Brian Bell, he was publicly named by Kendrick's family as someone potentially involved in Kendrick's passing. Both him and his brother were accused by the Johnson family of having a history of bad conflict with Kendrick. However, their father was an FBI agent, and even though there were potentially persons of interest, nothing ever came from that, which is why a lot of people believe that there was some sort of cover-up here. And that leads us to the surveillance camera footage from the gym, which is one of the most suspicious and controversial parts of the entire investigation, and it raised a lot of red flags. The school had security cameras in the gym, all over the gym, that was a fact. And when Kendrick's family started asking questions, they were told that there were cameras in the gym, which is great, right? Except when they actually got access to the footage, entire hours were just missing. They were gone. Specifically, the time frame when Kendrick would have walked into the gym, walked over to the mats, and allegedly fallen in. The footage just did not exist. And the footage that they did get, it was glitchy. Some cameras just froze, others randomly skipped frames, some were pointed in the exact opposite direction of where Kendrick's body was eventually found. And the craziest part, you see Kendrick walking into the gym, but you never see him leave. You never see him go near the mats. There's just no footage of it. It doesn't exist. The next time that Kendrick Johnson is seen on those security camera footage is when his body is being wheeled out in a body bag. Eventually, the FBI brought in an expert to look over the footage, and he said, oh, yeah, no, it looks good. It wasn't tampered with. It's totally fine. It's just weird. But then he also confirmed that the cameras were supposedly motion activated and that they were out of sync. So they claimed that the footage was not tampered with, but the cameras didn't line up, some didn't activate, and the ones that did were just coincidentally not filming when Kendrick was by the mats. Kendrick's family members have always believed, and still do now, that someone either deleted footage or turned the cameras off on purpose, that someone out there knows what happened to Kendrick and had the power or connections to make sure that it was never caught on tape. To this day, the case remains unsolved. Kendrick's mother has said, quote, they know something happened in that gym and they don't want it to come out, but I'll fight till my last breath to get justice for my son, end quote. Kendrick was a son, he was a friend, he was loved by so many people, and it's so heartbreaking that his family just has no answers. And insane. But that is all I have for today's case. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to Kendrick's story. But I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Security footage shows her calmly standing up and walking out of A&E, but she was never seen alive again. And where she was finally found is almost impossible to believe. It was the 29th of December 2017 in Durham, Oshawa in Canada. Suddenly, police got a very disturbing call. The plumbers had literally just gone out to a routine check at a property for drainage issues. It should have been a very normal morning, but they entered a real-life horror film. When they looked down one of the drains to see what the blockage was, they were like, this looks like flesh. It kind of looks like part of a body. Someone inside these apartments must know something. So they rang police immediately. They explained the situation and police were really freaked out and they went straight over there. They decided to knock on one of the residents' doors, and after a little bit of shuffling round, a man came to the door. They never expected what he said next. It was 45-year-old Adam Strong, who just casually announced, okay, you got me, the gig's up. It's a body. If you want to recover the rest of her, it's in the freezer. What do you mean? And he wasn't fooling around either. He was deadly serious, and officers could tell this from the second they walked into that apartment. They were gagging. The stench was making them physically sick. Now, an 18-year-old had recently gone missing in the area. Now, this was Rory Hatch. She'd gone missing in the summer and she was incredibly vulnerable. She'd really been struggling with mental health issues. She was also pregnant. Honestly, it really does infuriate me because pretty much every single teenager that goes missing with mental health issues, it's just shrugged off by police as, oh, they probably just ran away. She'd last been spotted on CCTV going into an A&E department with her mum. Now, I think her mum had dropped her off there and said she was having some kind of like mental health crisis. She wanted her to be checked over, but she figured that it would be a little while before she she was seen, so the mum left her there. But after sitting there for 15 minutes, Rory just calmly stood up and walked out of the department, never to be seen alive again. With this disgusting discovery at this man's apartment, the truth of what happened to their daughter hit Rory's parents like a ton of bricks. The girl had suffered a brutal fate. Her blood was all over Adam's bedroom walls and ceilings. And as he'd confessed to, body parts were in the freezer. But when police got Adam into the interview room to finally interview him officially, he kind of froze up. I guess he spoke to a lawyer and then he just decided to be obstructive. And while this was going on, investigators were scouring his apartment top to toe. It was an absolute state. If the rubbish, the dirt and the mess was not disgusting enough, the S-toys he'd collected certainly were. They found Rory's trainers alongside a hammer with Rory's DNA on it. And one of the most disturbing things I might have ever seen in any crime case ever was a special skinning knife. Why did Adam have a skinning knife designed for skinning animals? What they found on that knife, the DNA on the knife, was even more disturbing than they thought. They thought that this was just going to be a case of Adam and Rory, which is bad enough. It was the DNA of another victim. This was Candice Fitzpatrick, another 18-year-old girl who'd gone missing, but this girl had been missing for over a decade. This killer had gone undetected in his apartment for 10 years. Just imagine knowing that about your neighbour. Like, I've just been casually living next door to a killer for a decade. And Candice had equally been very, very vulnerable. She'd also struggled with mental health issues and she'd been homeless at the time when she disappeared. Gradually, the police decided to kind of gain Adam's trust, and honestly, they decided to do that just by giving him some fast food. It was pretty easy. And he just started spilling his guts about what had gone on in that apartment. The way that he talked about this is honestly infuriating. He described trying to flush body parts down the drains as awesome. And this is absolutely wild to me. He admitted that this is how he actually spent his Christmas Eve, defrosting body parts from the freezer in a hot bath in order to then just flush them down the drain. He kind of did try to backtrack at his trial, but ultimately he did get convicted of first-degree murder for Rory, but only manslaughter for Candice. There was very clearly an S motive to his crimes, and it's believed that he killed Rory with a hammer. But honestly, this case really freaks me out, because what if he hadn't tried to flush those body parts down the drain? What if he just kept them in the freezer? How many more victims could he have taken?
17-year-old Valerie Tinbaugh was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. She was one of 3 children to her mother Sheena and her father Jack. She's been described as someone who had a smile that was infectious and a great sense of humor. Valerie was also the biggest animal lover. When she grew up, she wanted to become a vet. When she was still little, her family moved to Arlington, Indiana, and the summer after finishing her junior year of high school, she started working for her neighbor's lawn mowing business. This neighbor was a 59-year-old man called Patrick Scott. His house was located across the street from Valerie's house. So this guy, Patrick, was her neighbor slash boss slash friend, even though there isn't a reason as to why they should be friends, but I guess you can consider them to be, because they would spend time together outside of work. At the same time, though, Valerie was really good friends with Patrick's granddaughter. Days before she disappeared, Valerie shared with her mom that Patrick had her location on his phone. He was able to track her. And her mom, of course, thought it was weird because there's no reason as to why this neighbor man should have her daughter's location, but Valerie just brushed it off and said, I don't know, he just added me on there with his family. So I get the feeling, I don't know for sure, but it feels like sometimes Valerie would tell her parents that she was going to hang out with Patrick's granddaughter and his whole entire family as a whole, but then she would end up hanging out alone with Patrick. And Patrick, on the outside, I imagine he presented himself to be this caring, sweet, old neighbor man, but on the inside, he was everything but. Regardless, though, he was a neighbor that Valerie's parents trusted. In describing their relationship, Valerie's mom has said, quote, she and him had a bond. They were friends. She worked for him, but she also hung out with his family. His granddaughter was her friend, and we went places with them, end quote. June 7th of 2023 was a Wednesday. That day, Valerie had plans to work for Patrick, so she left her house in the afternoon, and that was the last time that she would ever be seen again. It was getting darker, it was getting later, and Valerie wasn't coming home, and knowing that she had plans to work for Patrick, Valerie's mom called Patrick and asked if he knew where she was, but Patrick acted clueless. In fact, he told Sheena that Valerie didn't have plans to work for him that day, and he said that he hadn't seen her and that he had no idea where she was. That same night, Patrick, along with his wife, went over to Valerie's parents' house, and they were saying that they didn't didn't know anything, specifically Patrick, and he brought up the idea of Valerie running away on her own accord. Valerie Tinbaugh was reported officially missing by her parents the following morning, June 8th. Luckily, law enforcement took it seriously from the very start, and they put out an alert for the public asking for everyone to be on the lookout for Valerie and reported that she was believed to be in extreme danger. Officers met with Valerie's parents, going over her last known location and learning that she had left the house that day to go and work for Patrick, which of course led investigators to questioning Patrick, questioning potential witnesses and or other neighbors, just trying to get an idea of where she could have gone or what could have possibly happened to her. Patrick Scott, from the very beginning of the investigation, proved himself to be a liar because he could not keep his story straight. In the first conversation that he had with police officers, he told them that he didn't see Valerie at all on the 7th, and then after a witness came forward and said that she saw Patrick and Valerie together on the 7th, Patrick then said, "Oh yeah, I did see her on the 7th, but I dropped her off somewhere and I don't know what happened to her after that." When that was proven to not be the case, Patrick changes his story again and says, "Okay, yeah, I was with her on the 7th and I didn't drop her off. We were at my house together, but then I left because I had to go to work. And I don't know what happened after that, but that was also proven to be a lie because Patrick did not go to work that day." Needless to say, this guy was sus to investigators from the very beginning, and when he gave his phone to officers for them to search through it, the suspicion against him only grew. Because first of all, there was a text from Valerie to Patrick letting him know that she would see him soon, confirming that they were together on the 7th. But then there were 2 texts from Patrick to Valerie, one on the 7th and one on the 8th, asking where she was. Which is weird, remember, because he literally had her location on his phone. So why would he be texting her if he could track her? Was it because he could have possibly been attempting to create some sort of alibi for himself to make himself look innocent? Yeah, probably. That's probably exactly why. Investigators were so suspicious of him and found him to be so inconsistent with his stories that they charged him with falsifying information to police. But even with that, they had no answers, and the priority remained to find Valerie. Days passed, weeks passed, and then 4 months passed, but it was on October 11th that investigators showed up to Patrick's property with a search warrant in hand, and with them they had cadaver dogs, and they began to search. Multiple cadaver dogs alerted to the scent of human remains on the property, but even with the help of helicopters searching from above, they were not able to find anything. It wouldn't be until November 28th that the search for Valerie would come to a heartbreaking end. While searching Patrick's property for the second time, officers discovered a large dirt pile and debris that showed a clear disruption of the ground. Using shovels, they started to dig until they came across a large wooden box in the ground that was completely wrapped up in tarp. When they opened the box, one of the first things they saw was a human hand with orange fingernail polish. And immediately they knew what they were looking at because in a photo that was posted of Valerie on June 7th on social media, the exact day that she had gone missing, she was wearing orange nail polish. They opened the box and they found the human remains. Those remains were later confirmed to be that of 17-year-old Valerie. The discovery of her body broke the hearts of so many people. When her parents were informed, they experienced so many emotions, none of them good. They were feeling anger, betrayal, and confusion towards Patrick, not understanding how or why he would be capable of doing something like this to their daughter. They felt guilt, they felt heartbroken, complete and utter devastation. This is a quote from her mom, quote, "There's going to be a hole there forever. There's a hole that is never going to be filled. My happy family is gone," end quote. 59-year-old Patrick Scott was immediately arrested and taken to the police station to be questioned, where he surprisingly gave a full confession. Patrick told investigators that he used a belt around Valerie's neck when they were in the bedroom of his house, claiming that she tried to come onto him and he, quote, "wasn't going to have it." How despicable of this man to try and put the blame on this poor girl who is not around anymore to protect her name or say her piece. He said his wife and daughter, quote, "don't know nothing about what he did," and when talking about this belt, describing his version of events, he said to officers, quote, "I put it around her neck and I held on to it until she quit," end quote. He also mentioned that afterwards, for weeks if not months, he continued to wear that belt. When the two of them met up on the 7th, Patrick told Valerie that he, quote, "wanted to show her someplace special." Phone records show that they arrived back at his house at 12:59 p.m. and shortly after there was no more activity at all on Valerie's phone. Patrick said after Valerie was gone, he carried her body from his bedroom into his office where he left her there for one day until he figured out what he was going to do, and the next day he put her body in the wooden box and dug it in the ground to be left buried on his property. As for his motive, Patrick claimed that he got rid of Valerie because, again, she came on to him and he didn't want anything to do with it. But also he said that she allegedly threatened to blackmail him if he didn't buy her a new car. His story was that Valerie told him that she was going to tell people that he threw himself onto her if he didn't agree to buy her a new car, which makes no sense to me. However, he said that this wasn't something that he planned. He actually claimed that it, quote, kind of just happened, end quote. Patrick Scott accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to 1 count of murder, was sentenced to 57 years in prison. And I want to end this video by remembering 17-year-old Valerie. I want to read a quote from her family members. It says, quote, "She had a smile that was infectious and she had a great sense of humor. She loved video games, singing, and spending time with family and friends. She loved her family and was great with her little cousins. Valerie loved animals and made it known she wanted to be a veterinarian. She left behind her favorite dog, a Boston Terrier named Lacey." Yet again, another heartbreaking story, and it's these kind of stories that are just like, there was no reason as to why this should have happened. It didn't need to happen. It's literally just out of pure evil that men like this Patrick Scott do things like this. It makes no sense to me. It makes me sick. It makes me want to throw up. But that is all I have for today's story. Thank you guys for spending time with me today. I hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of James Carter. Plainville, Connecticut, 2007. 25-year-old Tiana Notice got a MySpace DM from 28-year-old James Carter. He was asking her out on a date. Even though Tiana agreed, she told James that she wasn't looking for anything serious because she was just getting out of a 5-year relationship. But James was laying it on thick. He told her he owned his own house, that he manages a financing company, that he doesn't have any children, but he wants some, and that got her. The two started dating, and James is looking like the perfect boyfriend until only 6 months into the relationship, he randomly gets arrested. Tiana is thrown all the way off about this, so she had to do some digging. While he was incarcerated, she found out that he was locked up for domestic violence against his ex-girlfriend. He ended up doing 5 or 6 months in jail, but right before he got out, Tiana dug a little deeper and found out that his ex wasn't the only one with the domestic violence charges against him. He had a long rap sheet of not only crimes, but just abusing women. James was released in November of 2008, and by December of 2008, Tiana had completely ended the relationship. She was still trying to give him a little chance when he got out. But James said he wasn't letting her go. He harassed Tiana after the breakup. She would frequently see him sitting in his car outside of her apartment. He would even follow her when she ran her errands. On January 4th, 2009 is when she finally confronted him, asking him, why is he doing this? He grew irritated and went to the police station to file a restraining order against her. Even though he didn't have a scratch on him, he was granted his restraining order. But what do he do as soon as he get it? He starts sending Tiana and her family and friends threatening text messages. So on January 8th, just 4 days later, Tiana went to go get a restraining order against James. But she had all the proof in the world. He had all her text messages printed out. When she was granted her restraining order, this infuriated James. As soon as he was served, Tiana started getting threatening emails saying, "As God is my witness, punishment is on the way, so be prepared." When Tiana took these emails to the police station, they told her that they were non-threatening and that it was nothing that they can do. The very next day, this fool goes up to the police station and says Tiana is harassing him, but with no proof. And he also wanted to get a restraining order for his girlfriend, Jessica, because Tiana was harassing her too. On the 16th, the judge extended both of their restraining orders, 6 months, no contact. But on the 31st, James decides to go up to the police station with a picture of Tiana saying that she left that at his house with her number on it, telling him to call her. And the police like, why would she do that? The back and forth literally never ends. The only difference is he's playing. This woman is really getting harassed. On the morning of February 7th, 2009, Tiana is leaving out for work and all 4 of her tires are slashed. She called the police, of course, only to be told it's no proof that James did this. Tiana's father like, man, forget this. That same night, he decided to set up a camera himself in her apartments. That very next day, James came to drop off a letter saying, Tiana, please forgive me. I never cheated on you. Tiana and her father are thinking they finally got him, but the tape didn't capture any of it. But Tiana still took the letter down to the police station and they finally agreed to get a writing sample from him. But they didn't just go arrest him first. They gave him a heads up that they was looking for him for that writing sample. Now James is pissed. He like, I don't apologize to you and you still called the police? On the morning of February 13th, James called Tiana while she was at work. Tiana couldn't believe it. When she realized it was him, she hung up and immediately called the Plainville police, who told her to call the Waterbury police because that's where she worked. Mind y'all, it was only 18 miles apart. When Tiana called the Waterbury police, they said, we need to see your restraining order. And when she gave them the restraining order, they gonna say it looked fake. Tiana mama like, don't worry about it. They're gonna get him for the handwriting. But until they do, come and stay with me until we know he's in custody. But Tiana made the mistake of going home. On February 14th, 2009, she was walking into her apartment about to get some clothes to go back to her mother's house, but James ambushed her and stabbed her 20 times, 2 times in the heart. But somehow she still had the strength to call 911. She told the dispatcher that I'm bleeding to death and my ex-boyfriend stabbed me. She lost consciousness soon thereafter. James was found less than an hour after Tiana was pronounced deceased. Even though he denied killing her, he didn't know that she called 911. He also didn't know that her father was still surveillancing the lot, so part of the murder was caught on camera. Also, Tiana's neighbor seen his car leave the scene, and her blood was on his pants. On October 11th, 2011, James Carter was sentenced to 60 years in prison, which I think is the max in Connecticut, if I'm not mistaken. But Tiana's parents ended up suing the police department and getting $10 million. And I know that won't replace your daughter, but they deserve to get sued. Tiana went to the police 33 times in a 6-week span and got nothing. They deserve that. I wish y'all would have got $100 million.